think that's really what Saul's issue was. It's, what turned his heart, what started him going, was the women shouting, hey, Saul has killed his thousands, but David's killed his 10,000s. That's an insecure sort of attitude, isn't it? So here's the signs that fear and insecurity are driving your pride. Number one, you do compare yourself to others. And that's what Saul was doing. He was comparing himself to David. And he was upset because others were comparing him too. But it works two ways. One way is you're really deeply insecure, and so you start to compare yourself to others. Surely you know what this is like. You know, it's like, man, how could she eat all those desserts and stay so skinny? Right? Right? Yeah. Or, man, I like that figure. I wish I had this or that, whatever this or that is. Man, you know, that guy, he's just so popular. I wish I could be popular like him. Right? And as many of us as there are, there's that many different variations of it where we're comparing ourselves to others. But pray to God you don't get, well, you don't get comparigance. Comparigance is simply this. You think you're better than everybody else. That's when you really have gone south. Comparigance is when you compare yourself to others and you're arrogant about it and you know you're better. I can tell you that can be a real preacher problem. Honey, you don't think I preach like him, do you? I'm better than him, aren't I? Yeah. Honey, how'd you think he did? What about compared to me? You know, I do that better. I illustrate better. I do this better. If that can happen to preachers, by the way, it can happen to a lot of people. It can happen to all of us. Number two, your self-worth is determined by your latest performance. I really understood that when I was in sales. And so I think sales actually was God's proving ground for me to go into ministry. Because you go from hero to zero on Friday night and Saturday morning. At McDuff, and I was the top salesman in the country for McDuff, it was really easy to get pretty arrogant and feel good about yourself because your paycheck was bigger than anyone else's. So Saturday morning, the paycheck roster would come in and it would just be faxed to the store. It didn't have everybody's name on it. It just had their social security number and what the paycheck was. And so I always knew I was making at least twice as much as anybody else in the store. And but that presented a problem because that was based on Friday night's performance. And you're a hero on Friday night. Guess what? It's Saturday morning, and it starts all over again. And now you have to perform all over again. You have to be a winner all over again. If you're preaching, hey, preacher, your last week's sermon was great, and now you have to preach the new one this week. And you have to be just as creative. Or worse yet, if you're doing the comparison thing and you're comparing yourself to others, you don't know who's bigger or better than you. Right? And again, if it can happen to preachers who are supposed to be so close to God, it can happen to any of us, can. Number three is a biggie. You can't celebrate someone else's success. You just can't. You can't even really celebrate your own success. You can't, you just don't like to see, so it makes you uncomfortable. The compliments make you uncomfortable. But somebody else getting complimented really drives you crazy. Particularly if it's somebody that you're comparing yourself to or you're competing with internally and you just can't handle their success or how somebody else likes them, or if your husband seems to pay more attention to her and you're feeling particularly inadequate about your looks or your figure or whatever right now. You just don't feel attractive. Those sort of things, you just can't celebrate someone else's success. And you then go to the fourth thing, and that is you squeeze gifted people out of your life. You just can't handle having somebody who might actually be better than you. You just can't handle it. Business, again, was a great proving ground. I still, one of J. Paul Getty, great quote, said once, I'd rather have 1% of the talents of 1,000 people than 100% of my own talents. I think that's a good one. But I also like the models where you see the most successful people in life are the people who surround themselves with even more successful people, and they're happy. And they don't get rid of them. If anything, they promote them because they want successful people around them. But number 5 is this is a biggie. You want some say in everything. And you can relate to those church meetings or those meetings at church or wherever. It can be a business, but it does happen a lot at church because we do give permission for anybody to speak, don't we? But some people just want to, it's like they draw attention to themselves. They want to have a say in everything. You can't go through anything without it all coming back to them in some way. Yeah, and again, it's a control issue. Proud people end up being, guess what? Controlling people. They do. And that was Saul. But like Saul, pride hardens the heart. And here's at least 4 signs for how hearts get hardened. Number 1, you start to think you're superior. Proud and hardened heart makes you feel superior to others. It does. Number 2, you get judgmental. I don't think it's an accident that the New Testament has so many Pharisees in it. Because I think Pharisees are God's gift to humanity. Not in a good way. It's just a reminder that we need to be humble. And so Pharisees are there to remind us how easily we slide into that judgmental, self-righteous, I'm better than you, I am morally superior to you, and everything you do wrong is an argument for how much superior I am to you. That's what's happening in our world today. You have 2 opposing viewpoints, each one taking this pillar of I am morally superior to you and the world would be better without you. And you put the 2 together and suddenly you start to get very ugly people acting even more ugly. Number 3, you become unaccountable. You don't make yourself accountable to other people. A hardened heart just helps you justify avoiding people. And it avoids somebody else checking on you. I like to say marriage is one of the great accountability partners, particularly in the ministry. You know, it's always great to have somebody who says, yeah, well, you're not so good as you think you are. You know, you need that once in a while, don't you? We need accountability partners who just kind of give us a checkup from the neck up. We do. And a lot of times it's the person we're married to. If you say, but my spouse never says anything like that to me, it's probably because they're too scared to. So keep that in consideration. Oh, and by the way, here's another little thing. If you're struggling to think, well, I don't know anybody who's like all of this, it might just be you. And therefore, you become isolated. Not only do you isolate yourself and you avoid others, but guess what happens? Other people isolate themselves from you. And you see amazing things. In business, you'll see leadership depart from a toxic personality in boatloads. They will just bail in boatloads. And that's because they just can't handle that toxic personality. They can't handle that prideful, arrogant, horribly self-centered, and ultimately insecure personality. So they bail. It's horrible when it happens in a church. Years ago, we were in a congregation and we had a senior minister who let his success go to his head. The church had grown from 200 to 600. We had multiple services. We had just completed a massive building campaign. And he reached the point where he didn't listen to anyone else. He didn't listen to his four associate ministers, and he did not listen to his 5 elders. He became isolated, and he became even more and more and more convinced. And finally, we said to him, and I was the leader, just trying to get everybody back together, just trying to get them to understand, hey, we need to be in this together. We need to ride through this season together and try and keep them from bailing, and at the same time get him to listen. So finally it boiled down to this. We're on your team, but we don't feel like you're on our team. That's a pride issue. That's an isolation issue. That's a identity issue. That is the fear of insecurity and pride taking over your heart. But is there an answer to this? Yes, there is. And here's a humbling passage. James chapter 3. Now, notice what it says. Consider the Proverbs of the New Testament. James has a nickname. I like to tell people, if you want a really good Bible study, go to the book of James. There's 54 commands. Try and identify all 54 commands, but also look at the structure of it. James approaches it very much like a New Testament Proverbs. And these verses, starting at verse 13 of chapter 3, they're tough. I can tell you it's humbling. Well, let's read them together. If you are wise and understand God's ways, prove it by living an honorable life, doing good works with the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you are bitterly jealous and there is selfish ambition in your heart, don't cover up the truth with boasting and lying. For jealousy and selfishness are not God's kind of wisdom. Such things are earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For wherever there is jealousy and selfish ambition, are you reading this, Saul? Likely not. There you will find disorder and evil of every kind. But the wisdom that is from above is, first of all, what? Pure. It is also peace-loving, gentle at all times, and willing to yield to others. It is full of mercy and the fruit of good deeds. It shows no favoritism and is always sincere. And those who are peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of righteousness. So, how do you practice humility? How do you do it? Well, I gave you the heads up before we started. So here's the ways you practice humility. Number 1, never lose your gratitude. Be thankful, and I think Paul said it something like this: in all things give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you. Pray without ceasing. Rejoice everlasting. I'm kind of mixing those up for you. It's a great passage. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Number 2, take the low place. Focus on serving, not on being served. Number 3, and this is a biggie, keep a notebook handy. I learned this practice a long time ago, and that was, no matter where you are, you keep notes. It's not a memory issue, it's a reinforcement issue, but it's also a pride issue. Because if somebody else is going to speak, by taking notes, you're humbly admitting that they're worthy of taking notes. So at my house, even on my person, actually, if you look at my phone, the reason I choose the phone that I do is it's got this little pin, and I can pop that out and I can quickly take a note, even if I don't have note paper around. If my family's going to be confused when I pass on, because I've got little notebooks and journals and things all over the place, so they're going to be confused. Was he writing this for himself, or is that a quote from somebody else, or whatever? So that's what I leave you, just so you know. Try and figure it out. But always keep a notebook handy. Even when the person may not necessarily give you something wonderful, you never know. Number 4, push other people into the spotlight. And do a great job of telling how great other people are. Do a great job of lifting other people up. And then here's the biggie. Get ridiculously honest with yourself and with God. Take a passage like James 3, 13 through 18. And get ridiculously honest with it. Be brutally honest with yourself and with God and say, really, God, what do I need to work on? Really, God, how can I be more humble? Really, God, am I as good as I think I am? And by the way, if you're not all that great, guess what? That's a great thing. You know why? Because God's ready to build you into the image of Jesus Christ. And God doesn't make bad stuff. He doesn't. I am particularly grateful for this congregation. Last week was phenomenal. I've tried to be fairly honest about the last year, and it's been tough. Because people have not been acting well in the United States this last year. And I was recognizing that there were a lot